it's tradition that this Sunday, this last Sunday before we enter into the season of Lent, it's tradition in the life of the church that we celebrate the Sunday of the Transfiguration, the Feast of the Transfiguration. And we do this by reading this scripture about this mountaintop experience that Jesus has with some of his disciples. They go up on the mountaintop, this mountain high, and they have this vision. They go up on the mountaintop, this mountain high, and the Shekinah glory of God shines all around them. And as they encounter this vision of God, immediately, Peter, at least, gets to thinking, this reminds me of something I read as a kid. This reminds me of something I read as a kid. And he begins to say, hey, you know, it's good that we're up here. Maybe we should make some booths or dwelling places. Now, I have been one of those preachers that have preached on this day, and I blame Peter for wanting to be too permanent location, wanting to sort of stay on the mountaintop by this movement of making these dwelling places. Here he is, you know, God is calling us to do something, and instead of coming down from the mountain and go engage in the work that God has in store for you, at least, you know, Jerusalem for Jesus and death on the cross, instead of engaging in that, you know, Peter wants to build up a building and live there forever. But that might be unfair. That might be unfair because Jesus, Peter, as he's having this vision and thinking about, this reminds me of another Shekinah glory of God moment, and it reminds us that, you know, we're supposed to be ever living out of tents. We're supposed to be ready to move at a moment's notice. We don't know what God has in store for us. And this festival of the booths is what Peter is referring to when he says, hey, maybe it's good for us to take out, I can build up a dwelling place because I got my tent right here on my back, and I'm ready to go wherever you send me. So it might be unfair for us to give a hard time to Peter about inviting, you know, saying, hey, I'll build a dwelling place. He's showing that he's ready. He's showing that he knows that this is the Shekinah moment of God. And I got my tent here, and I'm ready to pull it out, and we can stay and dwell in as long as we need to, and then we're ready to go and pack it back up and go. So he's remembering this tradition. He probably also remembered this Shekinah moment, the Shekinah glory of God moment when Moses went up on a mountaintop. And he brought along his disciple Joshua. And the very covenant of God was given in that mountaintop experience. And not just left up there, but brought down to the people. So he knows he's part of something, this tradition of going up and encountering the Shekinah glory of God and then going out to share it with others. Let's have that first fill in the blank. From the Exodus story, Peter's probably remembering this moment of a mountaintop experience when Moses climbs Mount Sinai with Joshua in tow. And in view of all the Israelites below, the glory of God looked like a raging fire at the top of the mountain. I've been saying Shekinah, glory of God. And some of you are probably scratching your heads. She what? I just realized only 2 weeks ago in a worship meeting that Shekinah wasn't a common word. Yeah, go figure. I had to look it up. Here I thought it was a common word, but it's not. It's a Hebrew word. And so it's a Hebrew word. And what does it mean? Well, first off, you want to spell it and look it up on the Google. It's S-H-E, so it starts with she, and then K-H-N-I-A. K-H-N-I-A. Almost like China with a K. Then, after the A, just put an H, because Hebrews, they always want to finish their words with H instead of the A. So put an H at the end. Shekinah. What's it mean, this Shekinah word, Pastor? Well, simply, the definition is presence. God's presence. Or you might say God's dwelling, God's indwelling. So in this Shekinah glory of God moment, Peter's thinking, hey, we should get the dwellings out so that God might have a place to indwell. So it's absolutely appropriate. And not a permanent place, but a sort of temporary place, because we know that God, as he knows from the story that he learned as a kid in Sunday school, that God comes down from the mountain, and God's covenant is part of the people, and God shapes the people. And he knows, as he's been visiting with Jesus, that Jesus is saying, it's not just about the temple of Jerusalem, but it's about the temple that we are, that God makes us into. And God's going to infuse us. And we get to take God with us. In that story, that Shekinah glory of God moment for Moses, he was so indwelled by the very presence of God that his face shone. And that when he came down, and every time he visited with every time he'd go into one of the dwelling places where they kept the tablet, and every time he'd go in and consult, he'd come back out and his face is shining. Almost too much. People ask, can you put a veil on, please? Because it's too much to look at you. The mountaintop experience. And so now we have this mountaintop experience that Peter and some others are encountering, and they're up there, and the glory of God, the Shekinah glory of God, are on that top of the mountain, and it is bleaching the clothes white. Let's have that next fill in the blank. And Jesus, it says here, he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became a dazzling white. Okay, well here's another word that we don't use very often, transfigured. What does it mean? Makes it hard for pastors to preach on this Sunday because, here's a word, transfigured. We know what transform, we use that a lot in the life of the church, but this is not transform. It says up there, transfigured. And so I think that preachers tend to have a difficult time on this day, and sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. Sometimes we focus on how Peter's trying to keep it a permanent place on that mountaintop experience, and that might not be fair, as we just found out. What does it mean to be transfigured? It means to, let's break it down to etymology. It means to move from from one state to another state, and figure, our figures. To have our figures move? Some of us could use that finger movement. So then it got me thinking about another Shekinah glory of God moment for me when I encountered. I always think of the glowing of Moses and the glowing of Jesus when I hear that word Shekinah, because it sounds to me a lot like shine, but it's really about an indwelling moment. And I think about another shining moment in my life, and I think about that time when we went into the dark room when we were expecting Ethan, our first baby. We went into that dark room where they have that machine that they squirt the cold jelly on there on the belly, and you put the ultrasonic device on the belly, and you begin to see, and what's shining in that room, in that dark room? The monitor. And it's shining. That's the only light in the room. It's the monitor. Thanks. There it is. And there was a head, and I'm looking around, and I studied human anatomy, and I was able to identify all. I was proud that I could see all these things. But there's the spinal cord looking pretty good. There's the heart looking good, and then I was impressing the X-ray tech there, ultrasonic tech. And then she got down to around the feet, and she turned the monitor away from me. I'm like, well, what's going on? Why are you turning the monitor away? I thought maybe she was annoyed with my anatomy lessons. And she spent a lot of time looking around the feet area. We were getting a little uncomfortable. Is everything okay? No, everything's not okay. I need to have someone else take a look at this. And we called another doctor in, they consulted and looked at it. And still, not telling us what's going on. What's going on? As I saw the glow of the monitor in their faces, and they looked a little nervous. And finally, the doctor said, we need to do some more tests, but it appears that your son has bilateral club feet. And I knew what club feet was, but I didn't really do much studying on it. But basically, club feet is this disfiguration. Talk about transfiguration, let's talk about disfiguration. It's this disfiguration of the feet, and it causes them to curve in, and sometimes even flips them upside down so that the patient ends up, if they can walk at all, they end up walking on stumps or clubs. It's like a golf, it makes your foot look like a golf club. That's where it gets the name. And he had bilateral club feet, so it wasn't just one foot that was affected by it, but it was both feet that was disfigured and affected by it. This was the disfigurement of Ethan. Let's have that next fill in the blank. And so when he was born, it was true. He came out and we saw, and I kept hoping against hope that something was wrong, that these x-ray techs have no idea what they're talking about. That his feet would come out and they'd be beautiful feet. And they were beautiful, but they were mangled. They were beautiful, but they were disfigured. And so this is only about within a half an hour of his birth, and here the orthopedic specialist, the pediatric orthopedist, is coming in and putting stretching casts on his feet straight away. And Ethan lived with these stretching casts on his feet, and they had to be changed every week for 6 months. And I can remember that before you had to take the cast off on your own before you took them into the orthopod so they could recast. And boy, you had to soak those casts in this solution to get them off. And the orthopedic guys could rip them off real quick. It took me forever. And we'd have to sit in the bathtub, he and I, in this pickle juice or whatever it was, and soak them in it. And finally, so that we could peel it off every night, every week. So we had this journey that we make from Burr Oak, Michigan, where I was serving as a pastor, to Bronson Hospital in Kalamazoo, to Evansville, Illinois, where I went to seminary, and Julie and I both went to seminary. And that was our trinity, right? Our triangle that we lived in. And every week it was the same thing. We'd go to see the doctor, and every week he'd say, "It's not working. It's not straightening out. May need surgery." And in the church I served in, there were some Shriners. Lots of Masons and some Shriners. And they kept saying, "Bill, if you need anything, we're going to be there for you. If you need anything, we're going to be there for you. We have this wonderful hospital. It's in Chicago. And I know you're always going over there. And you got to remember, we can take care of this." And I always thought, no, it's okay. We got insurance. We're going to be all right. We have the medical plan. And I don't know if it's working, but we got a plan to handle this disfigurement. Said that next picture. But after weeks and weeks of this, and going on years, here's the place in Kalamazoo where we go to put on the stretching cast. You can see Ethan got that tortured look on his face there. And it got on to being, 18 months of this. And he still couldn't walk. And so finally I asked the new orthopod, "Hey, what do you know about the Shriners Hospital?" And he said, "I'm glad you asked me about that, because I was going to suggest that we talk to some Shriners and try to get them in to see that." And so he made the referral, and we had some Shriners come out to us. And I always heard that the Masons were these crazy folks, secret society, right? And I was a little nervous about meeting with the people in the red hats. And they actually came and they had the red hats on too. And they said, we just do this. We love kids, and we want to help share God's love. And so he became a patient at the Shriners Hospital. And praise the Lord that he had one surgery immediately at about 20 months, and then he had another surgery a year later. And let's have that next picture. And this is only a month after the second surgery that we had at the Shriners Hospital. And we were up north in Traverse City, and he was dancing around giving out free soda and pop to share God's love in a tangible way. And I can remember a moment in his life, I think it was right before this, and he was a little stressed out about going in and being in his shorts and having these boots, right? He doesn't have the cast on, he's got these boots on. And I can remember him looking at his scars and feeling uncomfortable about his scars. He's like, "My feet are ugly." And I can remember saying, "They're beautiful." Christian tradition says that the scars of martyrdom are badges of heaven, are badges of honor in heaven. The scars of martyrdom are badges of honor in heaven, because they lived and died for the faith to make their witness. And those are evidence of that. And even though he didn't live and die by these scars that he has on his feet are evidence of God's love for the world are evidence of God's shining love for the world. And I look at them and I just smile. I look at them and I just feel God's presence indwelling in me. And he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Through everything that we have, everything that could possibly happen to you, sometimes it leaves us with some scars, and those scars can leave us feeling embarrassed. But I would encourage you to imagine your world being transfigured, from disfigurement to transfigurement. Have that moment in your life when you look at the scars in your life and you realize, wow, what evidence of God's love that these scars represent. How I've been changed through these scars. Let's have that last fill in the blank. The song that on Eagle's Wings reminds me of this. And God will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun. S-O-N. And hold you in the palm of his hand. And everything that occurs to us, it might feel like it's cut off a piece of us and left us with a gaping wound. But God's even working in that wound, and God's seeking to fill into that open space, that vacant space that happens in your life, and he's working to transfigure that disfiguring moment to become a transfiguring moment. Your challenge this week, if you choose to accept it, meditate on the scars in your life. How are those scars in your life? How have they moved from being disfigurements to transfigurements in your life? I invite you to read John 9, 1 through 5, and I didn't mention it in the sermon, but this is a story that I needed to go through in order to get my head right. I blamed myself for Ethan's disfigurement. I thought it was because of something I did wrong. But it wasn't something I did wrong. It was so that God might be glorified in the situation. That God could shine through the situation. I invite you to read John 9, 1 through 5, and hear about the kid who was born blind from birth. And then, as a spiritual discipline this week, I invite you to bleach your whites. And if you don't know how to do laundry, you should learn. But if you don't know, you might try to pick up the idea that Peter had, at least, in the face of this transfiguration moment. Find your tent, unpack your tent, make sure it's nice and clean, and then repack it up, knowing that we don't know where God's going to send us. And we need to be ready.